Continuing to follow the breaking news here on CBS Sports HQ, Jim Harbaugh leaving Michigan to become the Chargers' next head coach. 5-year deal, as confirmed by our CBS Sports lead NFL insider Jonathan Jones. He spent 9 seasons in Ann Arbor, and man, what a turnaround that he built for Michigan, leading them to the national championship this past season, their first since 1997, and now returning to the NFL. All right, so welcome Sam Webb in 24/7 Sports, Michigan insider. And Sam, you have been reporting on all of the ongoing developments within this story about how Michigan was willing to grant Jim Harbaugh immunity had he stayed. What can you tell us right now about where things stand at Michigan with Jim Harbaugh leaving?
Well, a couple of things. I think it was something that they have been bracing themselves for. I think you could see over the last 3 seasons that this was an itch that was going to continue to be scratched. I think, especially after he came back from the Minnesota dalliance and said, hey, I'll never look at the NFL again, and then looked at it again next year. It's not a criticism. It's more an observation that they knew that this is just the cost of doing business with a guy who is as good as Jim Harbaugh. If you wanted Jim Harbaugh, you were going to have to deal with him looking at the NFL. And so I think they've been preparing for the future, what a future might look like without him, and especially in earnest this season and in the aftermath of it with him winning the championship. So I think it's pretty well set that Sharon Moore is the likely replacement, the overwhelmingly likely replacement as far as the NCAA is concerned. You got one investigation that's ongoing and received a notice of allegations about the other. I expect that they will get a verdict on those punishments before next year starts. And is it more likely now that the NCAA is going to be willing to accept time served, so to speak? I think so, especially when you consider their major bone of contention with Michigan's COVID violation concessions, the one that had to do with recruiting violations and in analyst coaching. Michigan conceded many secondary violations, but they came back and said, okay, that's fine, but we think Jim Harbaugh lied. We want you to concede that. And Jim Harbaugh wouldn't do that. With him gone, would they be more willing to accept the self-imposed punishments that Michigan has already served? I think you can make a case for that being likely, because it's very clear there's some folks at the NCAA, Jim Harbaugh wasn't their favorite person. So with him removed, Michigan might find them more agreeable to accepting the self-imposed punishment.
When you talk about penalties, what would be the severest? What would be a penalty that you'd go, whoa, I didn't see that coming? Or what do we think is going to happen? You're around that team. You've been reporting on the developments throughout the season. What's the penalty that perhaps Michigan would be facing now that Harbaugh is leaving? The fact that he's not staying there, it doesn't feel like the penalty is going to be as harsh. But you tell me.
Yeah, I think what you were looking for, were they going to tack games on Harbaugh? He already missed 6 games last year, and you could make the case that they would maybe add something more just for emphasis in his absence. Might they? I'm not suggesting they will, but what could something that they would do arbitrarily that you would say, wow, that seems harsh. Given what they've already served, maybe if they decided they wanted to take away some scholarships, but given what we've already seen and the severity of the violations or lack thereof, especially the sign gate violations. You had the president of the NCAA come out and say, hey, see, it's very, very clear that really had no impact on Michigan's performance. And you can see that. These violations, whatever they were really in place in the first 6 games of the season when Michigan was playing like East Carolina and Indiana and Minnesota, teams they would have beat up on by 50 points anyway. They went through the gauntlet stretch without their sign stealer guy, where they beat 5 ranked teams, where they beat Alabama and Ohio State, Penn State, Washington. So if the president of the NCAA is saying the point was proven, Michigan won fair and square, I find it hard to believe that the NCAA is going to come down after that and say, okay, we need to hammer them even more than they've already been hammered with the punishments they self-imposed.
Okay, so we wait and see what final punishments may be handed out. But from what you're saying and what I'm gathering from you is the fact that it doesn't sound like it's going to be a heavy-handed punishment from the NCAA. When you talk about...
Yeah, I was just saying, not if you consider, look, they suspended Jim Harbaugh. The first 3 games of the season, fine. They were playing high school teams. But the 3 games at the end of the season, that's a severe punishment when you're without Jim Harbaugh on the road at Penn State and home against Ohio State. You lose a game, there's no way Michigan is making a playoff. Michigan happened to overcome that obstacle. Now you could be of the mind that because they overcame, the punishment wasn't severe enough, but I think that's moving the goalposts. When you impose the punishment, or when the punishment was imposed, it was seen as very severe, and Michigan was picked to lose those games in many circles. The fact that they won doesn't mean the punishment wasn't severe.
Yeah, I'm talking about perhaps a postseason ban. If fans from opposing schools are calling, hey, give them a postseason ban, we now know more information. That's what I'm talking about. If that's what we're talking, like if we're talking about fines and scholarships being lost, those are penalties in their own right. But if we're talking about a postseason ban, that becomes, as you know, Sam, that's headline news. You and I are coming up and talking if that happens.
Yeah, well, I mean, so we got to see what comes of the ongoing investigation. I mean, a lot of this jumped off because Connor Stallions was on the field for the Central Michigan game against Michigan State. The belief being at the time that he was on the field stealing signs for Michigan. Well, there's an investigation going on at Central Michigan right now, and they're investigating whether he was there working for Central Michigan. And so if he was there working for Central Michigan and wasn't stealing signs for Michigan, is that really something that you should be punishing Michigan for? Now, that doesn't mean that he wasn't going above and beyond with extracurriculars and people in the stands with cell phones stealing signs. And if that was the case, and you feel like that helped Michigan beat Rutgers and East Carolina and UNLV, then fine. What should the punishment for that be? I think, like I said before, the coach missing 6 games, I think, is a heavy price to pay for what that transgression was.
Sam, you've been around this team for quite some time. You know Jim Harbaugh. You've been at his press conference. You've spoken with him. You know the players, how they respond to him. If you were going to talk to a media member, or let's say a Chargers fan in L.A. or wherever in the country, what are you telling them about Jim Harbaugh, and what would you say to an NFL player right now who's about to be playing for Jim Harbaugh?
The guy is a master builder of culture. I think the best coaches know that a winning system, a winning scheme, a winning program is not just about X's and O's. Most of these coaches know the X's and O's piece of it. But especially in the NFL, can you get guys to buy in? I would charge that, the Chargers have the components to be a contending team. I just don't think Brandon Staley had the chops to get the buy-in from the players to fulfill that potential. Jim Harbaugh does. He's proven it. Every place Jim Harbaugh has been, he has dramatically changed the culture. San Diego, Stanford, the 49ers, and Michigan. All those were losing entities before he got there. And he turned them around dramatically in a winning way, in a contending way, and at Michigan in a championship winning way. You don't do it every single time and not know what you're doing. This guy knows what he's doing. They will win. I don't know if they'll win a Super Bowl, but the Chargers will be better because they hired Jim Harbaugh.
There you go. That's straight from Sam Webb, who has been around this team throughout the season as Jim Harbaugh led the school to a national championship. It's first since 1997. Sam, appreciate the insight here on CBS Sports HQ.
Bye.
As you heard Sam report, our Dennis Dodd also reporting that Sharon Moore is the leading candidate to take over for Jim Harbaugh in Ann Arbor. Went 4-0 as interim head coach this season. Really sustained the excellence. It was as if they handed the baton to Sharon Moore. He ran the offense. He loved to run the football. We saw him run the football 32 straight times to end the game against Penn State. We saw the emotion, how much the players love him. And we're also being told that Sharon Moore has been gathering his candidates, his coaching candidates in an effort to get ahead of this, knowing that Jim Harbaugh was going to leave for the NFL, and Sharon Moore is set up to sustain the excellence that they have built there at Michigan.